Yeah, so I believe it was in March that they let us know, hey, we're going to charge you. And then in April, we
March.
arranged a date for me to turn myself in at the federal court in Raleigh. And so I'm not sure exactly what my lawyer was thinking would happen, but I don't think he was expecting them to, haul me inside, chain me up and basically leave me in a cell for a couple hours until, the court hearing, because the government wasn't even asking for me to be detained. I was released on my own recognizance, but for whatever reason, in those 2 or 3 hours before the court hearing, I had to sit in a cell with my legs chained together. And then when I went before the judge, they had chains on my arms, chained to my legs, the whole rigmarole, when they weren't even asking for me to be detained.
Makes no sense. Okay. So you plead not guilty, I presume. Do they ever offer you a plea deal before going to trial?
Yeah, so they did offer me a plea deal pretty early on. It was a better plea deal than they started offering people later, because I think they're trying to get some cases moved through quickly. So they actually, what they offered was 3 years probation. They would not recommend any prison time, and so what they wanted me to do was sign a statement saying I was parading, picketing, or demonstrating in the Capitol, and plead guilty to that charge, which is parading, demonstrating, or picketing in the building. And as someone who is not parading, demonstrating, or picketing, that was just completely off the table. You could potentially have, arranged to plead guilty to entering or remaining in a restricted area, which I'm not sure what statement of facts they would have wanted me to sign for that. But yeah, I wanted to go to trial because I wanted to tell my story to the court, sort of have my day in court. I guess more of an idealistic thing, because I wasn't expecting, the the court or the jury to go my way when I went to trial. But I guess, yeah, I wanted to go to trial because,
Well,
that's just sort of how the justice system is supposed to work.
well, I mean, hindsight is 2020, and there's been a number of people who accepted plea deals, were criticized, but now seeing what's been going on, say, well, I made the right decision in retrospect. 3 years probation, no jail time.
Yeah,
You
that's what they
say,
offered.
thanks, but no thanks. Let's go to trial on the parading and picketing. What were the other three charges again?
Yeah, so there's entering and remaining in the restricted area. That's the biggest charge, Class A misdemeanor. And I believe the other three are Class B misdemeanors. There's disorderly or disruptive conduct in a restricted area. There's disorderly conduct in a Capitol building. And there's parading, demonstrating, or picketing in a Capitol building.
And so you say no, thank you. Let's schedule the trial. They schedule the trial. It was a trial by jury?
Yeah, yep, that's what we chose.
Wh-
Yeah,
And
so
you
I
were
and I guess we put it off for a while. The government and us were both fine with continuing it. I guess it wasn't until, I guess, spring or summer of 2020 that they assigned a new prosecuting attorney to the case. And the new attorney was like, we don't want to continue anymore. We want to schedule a trial date as soon as possible.
Who was the judge? Did you say Judge Sullivan?
Judge Kelly.
Judge Kelly. Oh, Judge Kelly's been doing some wonderful things in some of the other cases.
I've
Okay.
heard.
So you say schedule the trial. What does jury selection look like for the trial? If are you allowed to get into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can describe the process. So basically, they have the 6C member jury panel come into the courtroom. The judge has a list of questions, which his list of questions was actually much shorter than the list of questions that the government and us jointly proposed. Um, so he had a list of questions that he asked everybody, and he had them basically take notes of which questions they would answer yes to. So basically, like, do you know the defendant? Have you watched video of January 6th? You know any lawyers? You know any police officers? You know, did you or anyone you're close to work um, near the Capitol, or live there, or whatever? So there's questions in that genre. And so then he went through the jurors one by one, and they basically did sort of the process they use for sidebars, which they would play white noise in the courtroom, and then the lawyers and me would pick up our phones, and then the judge would use that to sort of ask some more details from each individual juror about the responses to the questions that they had indicated yes for.
These questions seem so utterly generic. Do you get a palpable political bias feeling from the jury and the final selected jurors?
Yeah, I mean, it was consistent from with what you would expect from a DC jury in terms of the professions, the political leanings, everything.
I
Just
mean,
what
it's
you expect from a selection of the DC population.
60 people, 54 Democrats, and maybe one independent. Well, I don't know what the. Oh my goodness. Okay, so you get your jury selection. Are you allowed saying the demographic: men, women, white, black, age? Roughly.
I mean, anyone walking into the courtroom could have seen. So I think it was about half and half. A balance of men, women, older. I'm not sure if there were any that were that young that made it on. White, black, Hispanic.
Okay, so
there's a variety.
Ethnically diverse, but politically probably not so much, or ideologically, I should say. What does this trial look like? How many days does the trial go on for? What evidence is adduced? And just explain this, what many are going to think is a kangaroo court show trial. What was the evidence that they adduced to the jury, and how long did this trial last?
Yeah, so jury selection was a whole day, and then there were another 2 days of testimony. So that the government's argument was basically, Stephen Horn just decided to be a journalist when it was convenient for him, when he needed a legal defense, and actually he was just there to be a part of the mob. And so that was
I got to stop you there. I knew that's the argument. To which the defense is obviously, I uploaded this footage. I sent it to you before I was charged with anything for your assistance. How the hell can you raise? I presume that's what you raised as a defense, other than the journalistic defense. But I sent it to you.
We did we did get that in there. Unfortunately, we were not able to get in the statement that I had published along with the video on the night of January 6th, which was basically, I was there to document it, not participate in the protest. So, the judge ruled that was hearsay because it was, my own statement. So they used a lot of statements against me because there's an exception to the hearsay rule. But then we were not allowed to use my own statements for me, which I'm sure you are somewhat familiar with that rule.
I'm sort of on the verge of hitting my own computer listening to this. The Judge Kelly, there was an objection to the evidence as to the accompanying statement that you yourself provided when communicating the video unsolicited to the FBI and not knowing that you'd ever be charged.
So this was the statement that I made when publishing it to the public. So when I published it on Facebook, on Rumble, there's a statement that went along with it where I basically said, hey, here's what I was doing. I was documenting it. I wasn't part of the protest. I wasn't doing it, just for a thrill. But, that particular statement, which was attached to the video where I posted it, was not admissible as evidence.
I presume that's a basis for an upcoming appeal are you appealing this decision?
I'm not planning to at this point.
Well, but you don't know what how much time are you facing? Like, does this potentially carry jail time?
Yeah, for sure. It really depends on what the government will ask for. Some defendants on these charges, the government has been fine with like home detention or some, halfway house or something that's not, full prison. But other defendants, they've asked for multiple months in prison for these same charges.
I'm flabbergasted because the reason why I presume the judge says no, we're not going to let that statement with the original publication in is to compel you to testify in your own defense so that you can then offer that. Did you testify in your own defense?
Yeah.
Okay, and so you got.
And so we weren't allowed to bring it in my testimony either.
Well, I don't understand what sense that makes anymore, Stephen. I'm just a lawyer.
I'm not particularly that familiar with the rules of evidence, but apparently it has to do with the hearsay rule.
But it's not hearsay.
The government has some.
It's not hearsay when the person is there.
Exception for opposite party adverse admissions.
Okay, so look, I'm flabbergasted. I never practiced criminal law. I studied it. I'm flabbergasted. I'm going to have Barnes and I are going to talk about this Sunday night, and I'm going to ask the questions that I'd be asking. A, it's not hearsay because you're there to bring the out of court statement into court. B, just say it viva voce in your testimony. Why did you upload it? This is why I uploaded it, as confirmed by my statement the night I uploaded it. Holy crap. Okay.
Yeah, so I was allowed to say it in my testimony, but I wasn't allowed to say this is exactly what I said, and this is the post. So I was
That
allowed to testify as to
no
my motive, but I wasn't allowed to bring in that post to sort of reinforce it.
makes no sense. That makes no sense. Maybe there's something I don't know in terms of DC criminal law or federal criminal. That makes no sense. The question is, what did you do the evening of? Because you're a witness, you're the defendant. This is what I did, and here's okay. Deep breath. That makes no sense. So we're moving on. It doesn't really have. They're going to say, well, you got it in by the gist of it, and the jury doesn't motivate their conviction. They just say guilty. But so what was the other evidence? I mean, basically, the prosecution really only needs to prove that you were there willingly, and that let the jury believe your defense or not. They went for 2 days in prosecution.
So there was a full day of prosecution testimony. They had they had a Capitol police officer, talking about what they were doing in the Capitol and what their defenses were and what signs they put up and whatnot. They had a Metropolitan officer come up who was, I think, in charge of the officers who I was filming being assaulted from that statue, from the base of that statue. They had her come up and testify, well, every person in that rotunda was an equal threat to us because we didn't know who was who. And, and one of our questions in the cross-examination was like, well, you see this photographer who is across, basically I'm on the base of the statue. The photographer is up on something, on the other side of this doorway who is taking the picture of me, like, was he there? Like, was he also counted among this? But, I'm not sure how much of that argument we were sort of able to get in the minds of the jury because that the Metropolitan police officer had no idea who anyone was,
dude.
Including me.
You're an enemy of the DC jury pool. Your conviction is all but guaranteed, but I don't think everyone fully appreciated it that early on. Funny you should say it. Do you know who the photographer that captured you capturing the scene is? Do you know the person's name?
Yeah, so his name is Ashley Gilberton. He also goes by Ash Gilbertson. He was actually one of the first to enter the Capitol through the Senate wing door after the rioters had busted it open. He was interviewed for the HBO documentary, I think like 4 hours at the Capitol or something. And, he seemed to be fine telling his story of, entering through this door, going inside the Capitol, wandering all around, without any fear that the FBI was going to come after him for that.
And did the FBI come after Ashley Gilbertson?
No.
Was he was never arrested? So the dude who captured you capturing the scene, both journalists, I guess, was he credentialed? Stephen, did he have a little press pass?
So we never got like a full list of who the members were of the press gallery were at the time, but I don't believe so.
I'm just going to see if
he was more of a freelance photographer, not someone who would be regularly covering Congress. So I mean, the arguments they made along those lines were, not even consistent with each other. At one point they would be arguing, well, obviously any legitimate journalist, who's a member of the press gallery would be entering the Capitol through one of the normal entrances through the security processes, have their bags searched, whatever. But as we know, there are many journalists who entered through the exact same doors I did, whether or not they had press credentials, but they were primarily members of the mainstream media, and none of the members of the mainstream media who have entered through the Senate wing door, the Columbus doors, the West Terrace door, all of these doors are doors they would not be normally allowed to enter through. All these doors are doors that had been breached. So I think if the government were logically consistent in their arguments of what behavior applies under these offenses, they could have charged any of those mainstream media journalists who either were outside where the police lines were covering that, which was technically in the restricted area, or especially the ones who entered the Capitol. According to their arguments, they could have charged every one of those, and they just haven't.
Ashley Gilbertson looks like he's Australian. That he was independently hired or contracted with the New York Times for some war coverage?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if he was commissioned on that day or whatever, if he was just freelance and sold his
Yeah,
photos
but you
to
know,
them later. But yeah,
that goes
that's who
back.
was taking those pictures.
That goes back to what is a journalist, and most people agree it's an activity and not necessarily a profession. Was he credentialed? I mean, I'd love to know, but it won't change a damn thing. If he's working with the New York Times, he's an ally, and you are independent. They won't even recognize you as a journalist. When you testified in your own defense, did you make any statements that you said, "Oh, they asked a good question, and I may have just done something to harm myself in front of the jury"? Did they score any points that even you recognized?
Well, one thing they were asking me about was like they subpoenaed my whole Facebook record, and so they're asking about a bunch of conversations I had with a friend of mine who is a Trump supporter, and he was sending me tons of screenshots of posts he was seeing or stuff about the election fraud or Stop the Steal. So they were asking me about those and kind of implying guilt by association to some extent, where I was endorsing that. They also brought up how, in one of these messages, I said, like, I'm out protesting in an abortion clinic because, the church I attend, there's an abortion clinic in Raleigh where we go out, members of the church go out every Saturday and, hold signs, try to talk to people and stuff. And so, I'm sure that was not something that resonated positively with any of the jury members.
You need to stop there and we're going to flesh this out. They got into evidence Facebook messages that you had with either public posts or messages. It's not going to make much of a difference.
Yeah, messages.
They got messages in as evidence without excluding that on hearsay basis, whereas the message with which you posted the video to Facebook was not allowed on the basis of hearsay.
Yeah, because there's an exception to the hearsay rule for messages that are by the opposite party that are adverse to them. So basically, this is one of the reasons why, all lawyers in America who are, have any shred of decency will tell you don't talk to the police. One of the reasons is because if you talk to the police, that police officer can be called as a witness against you if you made some statement that can be used against you. But you and your defense cannot call that police officer to say something positive you said, because one is an exception to the hearsay rule that the government can use. The other one, there's no exception for the defense to use statements that are beneficial to them.
So I know of that distinction. It's party admissions against the interests of the party. Fine, but it also sounds like this is not even relevant to the case. This is just character, impugning your character through something that's totally unrelated. All right, so you protested at a freaking abortion clinic. Is strictly irrelevant to your actions and activities the day of. I mean, that's like evidence of character, which is typical. Okay, so they got that in, and you're protesting abortion, which for anyone in DC is going to be a holy sacrilege. How long did the trial go on for before closing arguments?
Yeah, so basically their case was a day. Our counter case was about half a day, a little over. And then by that time they had done their counter rebuttal after our case, and then did the jury instructions. That was basically the end of the third day. So they didn't start deliberating until, the morning of the fourth day on, the next Monday.
Yep. How long did they deliberate for?
About 80 minutes.
80 minutes. 80 minutes, an hour and a half, not even. That's like 4 episodes of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So when my kids ask how much time is left, we go by episodes of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So that's 3.5 episodes of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. They just sit there, let's chill, have a cup of coffee. Guilty on all 4 counts.